So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us here on DW Africa. I'm your host, Josey Mahachi, and today we are talking about the discontent in Africa. Four countries around Africa made global headlines this week for mass anti-government protests. They are angry citizens in Kenya, in South Africa, and also Nigeria and Tunisia. So, just to help us tackle this issue today, I'm joined by Estelle Mwai, a leading Kenyan youth and women's rights activist, and also South Africa-based Patrick Bond. He's a distinguished professor of sociology and political ecology. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me here on DW Africa. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay. Right. Let me start with you, Patrick. Thousands of protesters marched through South Africa's cities on Monday, calling on President Cyril Ramaphosa to resign over the lack of jobs and electricity, and as well as security forces guarded malls and streets to prevent any violence and looting. How did the protest go? Was it a success for EFF?
Many would say no, because instead of really shutting down and drawing tens of thousands, as the EFF had done in 2017 against the prior president, Jacob Zuma, this was a smaller set of protests. However, it is on the one hand being called a damp squid or a failure because of the lack of turnout. But it's also fairly clear that the ruling party, the African National Congress, in many places sabotaged, for example, by telling the major buses not to carry the EFF supporters. And, you know, from the apartheid era, many of the most angry, alienated people in the society are forced to live a long way away from the center of town, for example, in Pretoria, at the Union buildings, at the office of President Ramaphosa and at his house. And so when you stop the buses and you then stop hundreds and thousands of additional protesters, then you're really playing an unfair political game. And this is what the trick is for the economic freedom fighters who called the protest. They wear red and they're very demonstrative. They want to see a left-wing and, let's say, populist set of policies. But the irony is that in many of the same places where they have many of their greatest support bases, like here in Johannesburg, in Pretoria, the capital, in Durban, they were actually in an alliance with the same ruling party to run the metropolitan areas. And the big debate is whether next year, the major national election, will this party, the EFF, join with the ANC, which is expected to fall below 50%, to have a joint government. And the particularly personalistic part of this protest is that they want Cyril Ramaphosa to resign. They'd be much happier with his deputy, a new deputy president, Paul Mashatile. So you can see that some of the, let's say, protest direction is of a very specific nature, but it's in a context of extreme unemployment and dissatisfaction with the state.
Let me just hold you there, Patrick. You mentioned the elections coming up next year. I mean, with all these failures and a third of, South Africans are out of work, like they're jobless. Analysts expect the ANC to lose its parliamentary majority for the first time in 3 decades in national elections next year, like you mentioned. Your opinion on that?
Yes, that's probably going to happen. Now, don't forget the ANC has been running South Africa since 1994. President Mandela for 1 term, President Thabo Mbeki for 2 terms, President Jacob Zuma for 2 terms, and now President Ramaphosa. But the dissatisfaction continues to rise. And even though electorally this ruling party has been able to get more than 50%, in one case more than 67%, so they had the ability to change the constitution, they've never found a way to deliver the sort of better life that they've promised. And that's because the policies they've adopted aren't really their own. They come from Washington, D.C., the Washington Consensus. They come from international banks. They come from global capital, the mining industry. And now with electricity having often run out 10 hours a day of blackouts.
Do you have electricity now, Patrick?
In fact, even more.
Do you have electricity? Are you using
we do, we're lucky
now
because yes, sometimes I need a little solar lamp and sometimes I need a special inverter. The batteries for a couple of hours hold out. But if you're in the low-income area, you're not a middle-class academic, well, then you're just stuck. And if you're a woman and you're cooking, and your hot plate is no longer available, but you turn to wood or coal or paraffin, and then the air becomes very dirty and you get respiratory illnesses and particulate matter. And this is the gendered or the sexist way in which electricity shortages hurt, especially Black people. And that's the greatest tragedy, because during apartheid, they were denied electricity by the same company, Eskom, and now they're demanding free basic electricity, much more than they currently get. And they're demanding that the electricity stay on for ordinary people, maybe not for the big corporations. I don't think they'll win these demands until they get rid of this ruling party, which is very closely allied with big business and with the mining industry.
Okay, let's now go to Kenya. Estelle, thank you so much once again for joining us. Now, Kenyan opposition leader and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga has called for weekly nationwide protests. Hundreds of people across the country also took to the streets to protest against the high cost of daily life, and also some calling for President Ruto to, and obviously Raila Odinga says that he didn't win the elections. Tell us, how did the protests go and what exactly is happening?
Now, thank you very much for having me this evening. Now, in Kenya, the protests did not take place everywhere. We cannot say that we had demonstrations all over the country, but in the places where the demonstrations took place, it actually took another direction, because people were expecting it to be very peaceful demonstration, as the leader for opposition, although not officially declared, Raila Odinga, had mentioned earlier that they are going to be very peaceful demonstrations, but that is not what we saw. Because the saddest part is that right now there is a family in Kenya that has lost a young man, a third-year university student at the Maseno University, which is very sad. This is a youth who had a promising future. He just went to the street to just experience the freedom enshrined in our constitution on Article 37, that we have a right to peaceably and unarmed assemble and demonstrate and even picket. But you see, that right, as it is in the constitution, was not enjoyed all over the places where we had the demonstrations. That is in Kisumu majorly, in Homa Bay town, and some areas in Nairobi, the capital, such as we had Mathare, we had Kibera constituency as well, which have always taken part in the demonstrations since way back in 2018, when Raila Odinga had the same format, of having weekly demonstrations. But we saw a lot of people did not come out, people did not come out in large numbers as before, because I think also there is this wave of uncertainty, like what will happen. Kenya has a history of police brutality. Like in the past, we had even a young child, dying in the middle of the crossfire, and that a harmless baby, So people are like, why should I go out there and demonstrate? As much as it is in the constitution, it is my right. But you see, people are afraid. So that is the situation in Kenya right now. Yes, it is true. Prices of basic commodities have skyrocketed. We don't know what to do anymore, because even basic commodities such as food, such as paraffin, as Professor is saying, the women who use paraffin on a daily basis, whether there is electricity or not, right now they are not sure whether tomorrow they are going to have a meal for their family, because it is unaffordable. What was a basic need in the recent past in Kenya, right now, it is a luxury. I'm telling you, it is a very sad situation. And we have also seen people taking to social media to talk about whatever is happening in the country. But I also believe that we should give the government of the day a chance. They have only been in office for the past 6 months, So on the other hand, I think people are really waiting to see what the new president, into quotes, because he's not really new anymore. He has been in office for the past 6 months. So at least we should be able to see something, There should be a plan. There should be a way they are planning, to give subsidies to the local people, to the ordinary citizen who does not know what tomorrow will look like. And for me, I would say it is really sad to lose a young person in this demonstration.
Talking about losing someone, Estelle, I see that Raila Odinga has actually called for weekly protests. What do you think is going to happen? Do you see this as a solution? I mean, what happens on the next protest? One death is already a lot, Estelle?
Yeah, I mean, one is just too many. I'm sorry about that. We really have to look for other solutions. I believe there are better ways of handling this because we have seen it in the past. We have lost more people. Now we are going to weekly demonstrations. But who is demonstrating? It is not the person who is in office. It is not the member of parliament. It is the ordinary citizen who does not know what tomorrow holds for themselves. So I think the weekly demonstrations, for now, they are not really the solution that we need, even as a country. I believe there are better ways of uh, of solving these issues that are arising day in, day out, because it is really sad to lose people, harmless Kenyans who are just practicing what the constitution says. So for me, I would urge the leader of opposition to just have a rethink about the strategies they can be able to implement, just to see that we don't lose another life. Because I have personally seen women suffering in the line of these demonstrations, and we're not saying that it is bad to demonstrate. No, it is good. It is a right according to our constitution. But I still maintain: can other avenues be explored just to try and find a solution for everything that is happening currently in our country? Because it is not only in Kenya where high cost of living is being experienced. We can be able to, balance these things and look at an amicable solution to just make things work. We saw leaders being arrested. We had senators being arrested, but they were released. But since yesterday, we have youth who are still in the jail cells there. They're just languishing. Nobody has come to bail them out. So it is really sad.
Yeah, but Estelle, do you think this chaotic protest by Raila Odinga is another strategy or his strategy again to have a repeat handshake with the government?
I think so, because in 2018, actually, this was happening on a weekly basis. Then it started bi-weekly basis, and there was a handshake. The former president, His Excellency Uhuru, had a handshake with Raila, and things cooled down. But you see, after cooling down, we are back again to where we started all over again. So I don't know if this time around, if the handshake is really going to make things work for the better good of the citizenry, or it is just going to be a first aid method just to make things work for a little while, to make things cool down, and then after some time, we go back to the same cycle.
Now, Patrick, to you, do you think these protests, obviously, that were introduced by the EFF will solve the national issues that South African citizens are facing right now?
Yes, this is the dilemma for the EFF, how to make their own political agenda primary. And they have a few allies, for example, the Pan-Africanist Congress, as well as the South African Federation of Trade Unions and a few other smaller groups. On the one hand, the EFF wants to keep control of a political message, that they're the logical alternative on the left. Now, there's a center-right party, which is the Democratic Alliance, that's scoring about 25%, whereas the EFF hasn't broken 12%. But those things change. And what we've just seen, not only here in South Africa, next door in Mozambique, Nigeria, Tunisia, mass protests, Senegal as well, where the anger boils over. And it's not only a question of the electoral fraud, as we've just heard from Estelle, that keeps coming back. The more durable problems of socioeconomic injustice keep feeding this resentment. And whoever's in power is going to have a hard time. I mean, let's not forget, in Tunisia, it was about a dozen years ago that the Arab Spring, the 2011 uprising, began, and it began because of spark from a man, Mohamed Bouazizi, whose fruit cart was turned over by a policeman, and that had just followed the imposition of a value-added tax and corporate tax cuts, as the Ben Ali family that was ruling had really taken IMF advice completely straight down the line and oppressed its people economically. And by January 2011, really out of the blue, in 2 weeks, the Ben Alis were tossed out. And that sort of rapid, sudden response. I mean, I'm just watching the rapper from Mozambique, whose name is Azagaya, and he died a natural death. But then when the police saw that the funerals were sources of tremendous support for his message, a very strong anti-government and social justice message, well, they repressed it over the last few days. So one incident after the other, the Mozambican government shows its very repressive tendencies. And again in Nigeria, where about a month ago, an election contested, still not clear if the results were free and fair, and people even today were protesting and overrunning the parliament. And in Senegal, a similar dissatisfaction with the electoral outcome. But my point is that you can get all of the electoral protests and overthrows of these governments and popular uprisings, Algeria, Sudan in 2019, and Mali 2022. You can have these, but if the underlying conditions, which are the economic oppression, often visited upon Africa by its role in the world economy, by the West, but also by China, which is extracting raw materials very inexpensively. Until we solve those problems, we can expect more unrest.
Yeah, Patrick, you also actually wrote a publication on African grievances and protests, and I saw where you mentioned how countries like Tunisia, Zambia are being punished with soaring debts and also interest rates. Can you just elaborate more on that?
Yes, I have written a recent article for the University of Port Harcourt's Journal of Political and Administrative Studies, where I do trace some of the protests and then correlate them to two other important problems: the national debt crises and the way COVID was handled between 2020 and as it seems to have run out in the last year. And in both cases, I mean, you have very, let's say, impressive growth, GDP growth in countries like Zambia or in Ghana. But these two countries that were considered the poster child of the IMF and the World Bank as recently as about 2 years ago suddenly have gotten into a situation where they borrowed so much from both the European bond markets and from China that they've gone into default. And that again reflects how if you're running one of these countries and the treasury, you just run out of money, you have a terrible choice. Do you pay international bankers or do you feed your people? Similarly, with COVID, there was an enormous amount of potential for two things. One is to spend more on ordinary people during the lockdowns. And there was a little bit in this country, roughly $5 or $6 billion worth. But that was nothing compared to the slowdown of the economy, 6% decline in economic output. And the dilemma there is we needed these medicines to get us out. We needed the vaccines and treatment. But the West, and I want to single out Germany, because Angela Merkel and then her successor, Olaf Scholz, were two of the most important voices saying to President Ramaphosa of South Africa, you cannot have a waiver on the intellectual property on the COVID-19 vaccines. And this was done in the World Trade Organization, which is run by a Nigerian, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the former finance minister, and former deputy managing director of the World Bank. So it just goes to show that some very strong structural changes, and often those are motivated from protests from below. And I think that's what we must hope. Luckily in South Africa, no one was injured or killed. There were about 550 arrests on Monday from this EFF protest, but I hope it sends a signal, certainly to many in the economy, which really did shut down much of the central business district here in Johannesburg. Sandton was just closed. And it, I hope, sends a signal that these very angry people on the streets really need to be listened to.
Okay. Now, let's just go to Estelle before we talk about that last point that you raised, Patrick, because we really want to find out if protests are not the solution and what is the solution. Now, Estelle, William Ruto is adamant that he wants dialogue with the opposition. It is a wrong decision. Should he welcome the opposition for talks in order to solve the pressing issues?
Now, there is a time that the president spoke, and he talked about wanting to have a very formidable opposition so that it keeps the government in check. Now, I don't know what it meant to him, having a formidable opposition, but maybe this is what it meant to the opposition. So this issue about him having a truce or a handshake with the opposition, I don't know if it will really be the solution for all this, because first of all, the opposition is claiming that it wants the IEBC, the Independent Elections Commission, to open the servers just to be able to show that truly it is William Ruto who won the election. But again, the IEBC cannot do that. Why? Because it is not properly constituted. And now here comes the president wants to constitute the IEBC. And again, the opposition is talking about, no, don't constitute it. You're doing it the wrong way. So how will they be able to get electoral justice, you know? And again, the opposition is pointing fingers at the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in Kenya, that you did not have, what were they calling it? They did not take into consideration very many factors, not only during the elections, during the voting itself, but before and even after. So I think we are between a rock and a hard place, and it will take a lot of wisdom from the president and his advisors to know how to deal with the situation at hand. Because you see, it is very.
There are two things here. Is the problem the election results, or is the problem the situation, the cost of living in Kenya? What exactly is the problem here? What are these protests all about? Because I feel like it's more about Raila Odinga fighting the electoral process.
Yeah, so those were the four major reasons that were cited for the demonstrations. The electoral results were one of them. And again, the high cost of living, because why we have the wrong government in place. So all these reasons, all these reasons are, the motivating factors for this protest. It's about having a government of the day which is not considerate to the ordinary citizen. Doesn't want to bring according to the opposition, the government has failed on its mandate to deliver on its 100-day promise to Kenyans. So when you just mix all these reasons together, you find a very, very angry citizen on the streets. So I think having a truce, or rather the handshake, maybe it is one of the solutions that is going to calm the country down. But I'm also looking at it elections conducted in this country. So it is a case of wait and see what happens next, because as for now, the opposition has already served notice to the Inspector General of Police, right, that they are going to be doing the demonstrations, or rather the demonstrations are going to be taking place weekly, because on Monday we had claims that the notices were served late. So for now, it's all systems go for the opposition. It is up to the president to devise a way and to find a means of calming the country down and even just bringing an end to this protest.
Okay. Now, Patrick, back to you, South Africa. Some people feel that Julius Malema's strategies, or rather the way he does things, is a bit harsh. And from what you also said, I think if I got you right, you're saying protests are not the solution. So what do you think is the solution right now to try and tackle the issues that South Africans are facing?
Well, certainly Julius Malema has a very robust rhetorical style. He is a revolutionary in the guise of the traditional African who sees economic injustice and wants to see more redistribution of the resources. And I completely sympathize. My city is the most unequal city in the world. This is the most unequal country. And it's all gotten worse since, regrettably, the African National Congress adopted these neoliberal policies. And I think with the same way that Estelle said, people are very angry on the streets. And it may not be that in Kenya, where there's so many opportunities to engage in the electoral process, and there was a close election. In this country, we haven't had too many ways to throw out the government because it has a very strong prestige, having defeated apartheid. But let's not forget, Josey, that the protests do work, and they have done, for example, getting rid of apartheid, getting rid of the AIDS medicine intellectual property that prevented about 7 million of my compatriots from getting the medicines that they needed because they were too expensive. And so protests led to a change at the World Trade Organization in 2001. Then we've had protests over water and electricity, and sometimes those can be quite successful in forcing a municipality to serve a poor community. And the most impressive, I would say, I'm biased because I'm at a university, is the Fees Must Fall students in 2015, 16, 17. They won free tertiary education through mass protests. And the technique is always to raise costs of doing business as usual, so that the enemy, in that case the state, or sometimes it's big business, actually feels enough pain that they say, stop, go away, we will give you what we want. In this case, Julius Malema wants the president of the country to leave, to quit. And he's also using any other number of non-protest tactics, like going to court to demand that there's an investigation of the alleged corruption at the Pala Pala game park, where President Ramaphosa was apparently keeping hundreds of thousands of US dollars without having declared them. And secondly, that they want to see this electricity problem solved. And that will take much more than just protest. It'll take some strong creativity and turning off the electricity in some cases to some very big businesses, which give the ruling party money, but really can't defend their use and abuse of electricity. And those are technical problems or policy problems, but to change the balance of forces, protesters are vital, and they need to be there in their masses, not a few thousand as we saw Monday, but as we've seen in Kenya, the People's Parliament, the people of Kibera march up to the capital. When we've seen again and again on the African continent, masses of people can get right into the center of town, to the Tahrir Square, right into the heart of Tunis, right into Dakar, and right into Abuja today, into the National Assembly, and really disrupt business as usual. And sometimes that's absolutely necessary.
Now, Patrick, before we round up, I just obviously wrote also on Tunisia and Nigeria. I know you can comment on those two countries as well. Do you think now, especially when it comes to Tunisia, in terms of obviously racism, the issues that is happening with Africans or Black Africans there, the protests are justified?
Yes, I think typically in this country, nearly all the protests have been justified, and we still have so many racial considerations left over from the apartheid era. But also the critical point is that the youth are beginning to find their voice. So I see most of the protests over the last 2 years are not here in the middle of Johannesburg or Pretoria. They're actually on the beaches. And the reason is the youth are out defending the ocean against offshore gas and oil by two big companies, Total from Paris and Shell from London and Amsterdam. And that's where I see the future, because the climate catastrophe, such as we've just seen in Malawi, 500 dead because of Cyclone Freddy, or in Durban, South Africa, just about a year ago, in April 2022, a rain bomb that also killed 500. Youth of Africa are getting a good sense now that the climate catastrophe is coming down on them. And if the energy prices go up because Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, if the food prices are too high because of breakdowns in value chains, because of world capitalism having major problems, if the world financial system itself is quite shaky as we speak, then I do hope that the youth can connect the dots and take the biggest issue, climate change, and connect it to the economic injustices, connected it to the need for political democracy. And I think to do that, the last point is what they all need, what we all need, is democratic political organizations, both electorally, but also in civil society, and sometimes uncivil society doing protests, to be a tree shaker. So those who are on the inside who want change can become good jam makers with the right kind of fruit that they pick up after the very vigorous tree shaking on the outside.
Okay, thank you so much, Patrick, for that. Now, Estelle, your last question, I just want to hear this from you. How would you rate President William Ruto's performance so far?
In terms of percentage or what? Because there isn't a lot that he has done, actually. You know, because most of the projects that we are seeing his government, his officials, his cabinet secretary is going to launch are the projects that were started by, you know, the president, the former president, Uhuru Kenyatta. So I think he should pull up his socks. He should do more for the people who elected him. There was a lot of confidence in him, by especially the people who were very much against the government of the day. That time, they were really, you know, showing a lot of faith. People were really waiting on him to do something because he was in the previous government, you know. It's not like he's new to these issues. He knows them. He was the deputy president. So for me, I think he should do more. And people might not be very patient with him because the way he put out his manifesto out there during the campaigns, very vigorous campaigns, we expect him to deliver with the same vigor, nothing less. That is what I would say.
All right. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me today here on DW Africa as we were talking about the protests that are ongoing in some of the African countries, obviously Tunisia, Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya. So until next time, my name is Josey. Patrick, thank you so much. Any last words?
No, I think you've covered it well, and I just hope that when we talk again, like in France, where they nearly got to the point where the protesters could get a vote of no confidence and prevent the pension age from going up, sometimes protests get just so close. And I'm hoping many more African countries can get over the finish line and get what the people seem to really demand with their hearts and minds.
Thank you so much. And Estelle, any last words to your Kenyans watching us right now?
Yeah, I will tell them not to give up on the struggle. And even for the young people, though we may be very discouraged because we have lost one of us in this struggle, I believe that one day we are truly going to honor the life of that third-year student who has left us by achieving all that we hoped to achieve as a young people of this country, as the women of this country, and as the citizenry of this country.
All right. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me and to everyone who joined us on this live chat. Until next time, my name is Josey Mahachi. Good evening.
Good evening.